Guiding your next pop culture journey, this is In Quest of Geek.
The best explorers and heroes must now arm themselves with the social, cultural, and emotional tools they'll need to delve deeper than they ever have before. This is our Dungeon Dive.
With you on this dive will be Alix, your host and professional moderator.
JPG, pop culture critic and geek educator.
And special guest adventurer, Ken Rolow.
So sharpen your social commentary and prepare your most inclusive spells, because we're here to build better character.
Welcome back, Brave Questers, on our newest dungeon dive, Star Wars The Bad Batch. But a dive this deep is going to need some outside help, and we have Ken Rolow to round out our party. Ken, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ken Rolow. You might remember me from different podcasts within the network's previous iterations. I'm also known as Comic Shop Ken. I've been into the comics and geek industry for decades now, and yeah, just bringing what knowledge I have to help further our adventure.
Well, can you tell the audience a little bit about how you've been in the geek space for the last few decades?
So, I mean, when I was a kid, I was lucky enough to have the privilege of a comic shop being right across the street from me. So from 10 years old, I could go across the street and find organized comics and be able to find this is where I can just read the stories. Because a lot of times when people are just starting out, they're getting the stuff from Circle K or 7-Eleven, and they just kind of pick up a few issues here and there. They're hand-me-downs, and they're like, okay, well, I don't know what these are. I had the benefit of I can go to back issues and pull all these out and be like, oh, I can read the stories sequentially. And so that really helped build that catalog of knowledge. And from there, I worked at a comic shop from the age of 18 to now. And so I've worked in that field. I've also done several different podcasts. I do volunteer for Comic-Con International, and also worked with, what was it? Long Beach Comic-Con was another one I worked with.
And you also run a free comic book day a lot of the times.
Yeah, we do a lot of different events at the shop. So we do signings and different promotional events, and that's one of the first times that I was introduced to the network as the larger whole of everyone as a team. And yeah, that's where I started to meet through these different comic conventions, stuff like that. I've met different creators as well, and got a chance to dive into stuff with them and be like, oh, well, what inspires you? What brings your enjoyment to comics, and what pushes you to create more stuff?
You talked a little bit about inspiration. And I have to tell a little bit of a story before we start as well. We actually gave you the choice to pick what we were going to be talking about this month as well. And The Bad Batch was actually what you picked. So I wanted to try to address this on air, but what is it about Star Wars that really inspires you?
I mean, I guess initially it was just the high fantasy of it all, and it is just a science fiction version of knights with swords and adventuring and saving a princess, and that's that base adventure. But George Lucas put his own spin on it with, Lawrence Kasdan and a bunch of the other creators. And of course, when you look back, as you grow up, you get to learn oh, this was actually just a takeoff of Hidden Fortress, and he was inspired by other things as well. And so over that time, as the stories of Star Wars have developed, their inspirations have also become a deeper connection for me. And I mean, I think for a lot of different fans is that they see oh, well, this was inspired by this, and that's why I like it even more. And it gives you more of a texture to that background. And so that's why probably Star Wars has such a strong connection for me. I think back to my first connection with Star Wars, and it's almost not I don't have a defining moment, because it was always there. I remember my aunt having it on video and watching it all the time at her house, but I don't remember that first time that I watched it, because it was already baked in, because it came out in 1977.
It was ingrained in your life at that point.
Yeah, it was already part of the cultural zeitgeist. Star Wars was on Muppet Babies, so it's it was already there in our world, as a touch point. So Star
Wars. I've known you for a good amount of time now, obviously not as long as JPG here, and I've never seen you or heard you mention Star Wars or anything important about Star Wars or May 4th or anything.
You're a dirty liar. You're a dirty liar, Alix. And now I have to stand up for Ken on this one. You do have a pretty significant connection to May 4th now, though, right?
Yeah, as of recently, 2 years ago, my wife and I were married on May the 4th. It was a decision that
Shout out to Ebony.
There you go. It was a decision that kind of, it just trying to find the right date where like it just, even though like it like at the time, like normally we do Free Comic Book Day that Alex had mentioned. That's normally where I am the first Saturday in May is Free Comic Book Day. But because it was such a connection point for both of us, we're both big Star Wars fans, we decided to do it on that date. And it's also like, it kind of sets in like, oh, we're never going to miss our anniversary because it's always on May the 4th. So Star Wars Day.
I just thought it was so cute. I had to share.
I mean, we were there too. So, I mean,
yeah.
You know.
Were we?
I think, you know, without further ado, we should just jump in, right? And I think personally, this is going to be a really hard episode for me, just because Star Wars is. Wait, what?
It's going to be a hard episode for me. What are you talking about?
Well, I think for me, like Star Wars is such a property that's so near and dear to my heart that I feel like I will defend it more so than other properties because I'm so close to it, right? Like Star Wars is one of those properties for me that if you tell me something is wrong with it, like my immediate gut reaction is to defend it. And that's not a good starting point, but I don't think, Alex, you have the same problem, right?
I have the polar opposite problem.
Mhm.
I feel like, I mean, you guys have heard me say it a million times on a million different iterations of the show as well, but I'm so over the Skywalkers, and I'm so over so much of the Star Wars lore and the stories, and it's all coming in out of order, and I find it really confusing, and I can't ever figure out what's canon and not canon, and I just a lot of times I'm really uninterested, and like the moment somebody's like, oh, we're watching something blah blah Star Wars, and I'm like, oh, like it doesn't matter what it is, it doesn't matter what the Bad Batch was, my initial reaction was like, oh, we have to do something Star Warsy, like, ugh. And then I have to move that aside and give it an actual chance.
Well, no, and Ken, I know you are glad that you picked this one, but
I'm sorry, Ken.
How does that? I mean, as somebody who is a gigantic Star Wars aficionado, how does what Alex said make you feel? What does that trigger inside of you? I guess
it's. I mean, just like you, there's that defensive reaction of like, no, it's okay. But for me, the second thing is kind of the comic shop retailer part of it. Like, okay, well, what do you like? Like, what is your interest? Because I can almost guarantee you we can find something to connect you for Star Wars. If you're like, oh well, I'm not a Star Wars fan, but I love Lara Croft. It's like, okay, perfect. This is Dr. Aphra. She's actually like the Indiana Jones of the Star Wars universe, and she's an Asian woman in the Star Wars universe trying to find artifacts but also make a profit. Like. Or if you're like, oh, I'm much more of like, I think about David Boyd, like, oh, I come from a military background. Perfect. The Clone Wars is great for you because you've got this. Like, my first reaction is like, how can I find your in so that you feel connected to the Star Wars universe? Like, what can make you feel like, okay, no, this can be for me, even if it's just this corner of it. This corner can be for me. That's my initial reaction.
The main reason that we love having you be a part of our shows. I just want you to know. Because it is really easy for me to blow it off. It is really easy for somebody to just, no, let me defend it to the core, and this is why. But you are one of those really amazing people that promote exactly what our goals are by having shows like this, which is, not everything in the geek world is for everybody. But if you're trying to find a connection, I can help you. I can make that connection, make you feel like you're welcome and you're part of this. And that's what I love, because as much as like it's been a struggle for me to get into this world, it's never been that way with you. With comic books, TV shows, JPG will be like, oh, Alex is trying this. And you'll send a list of recommendations for me, like instantly. And so you've always been really supportive for helping people get into this stuff. And, that's a huge reason why we always bring you on no matter what iteration of the show we have, is because we love that about you.
Thank you. I try.
That actually connects to my very first question, and this is actually something that Alex struggled with when we watched The Bad Batch. Ken, how do you feel in terms of The Bad Batch itself? How do you feel about its accessibility into the series as a whole?
Oh man, this is funny because it actually ties to, like, I took notes and stuff as I rewatched the episode, and I thought about Andrew Lindy, who were like, he was given like, okay, this is the library stuff that you have to watch, Andrew, before you can do our episode, and then the second time you doubled down on that, and I'm like, oh, so what's the in for Bad Batch? Like, okay, so all 7 to 8 seasons of the Clone Wars series, and all, the trilogy, and then technically you could go into Rebels too, but like if you just wanted to go in, like it's a ton of stuff, and trying to break down and watch, like, can you just jump into it? Yes, but you're going to be lost, and it's going to be hard to like kind of like pick and choose. You'd have to go back and curate specific episodes and arcs from the Clone Wars series to kind of pick, okay, this is who Bad Batch is, and this is who their role with the rest of the Clone Army, because that's where this focus is going to be on the series from what I've seen so far, is what makes the Bad Batch special amongst these millions of clones. Like, how are they unique? And so it's like it's accessibility is pretty limited in a way. Like, it's very much like you have to know, okay, Clone Wars, Order 66, the Emperor, all this stuff it doesn't inform your emotions. You're just kind of like along for the ride. And you're like, all right, let's go, I guess. So it's, as much as I like it because I'm already dyed-in-the-wool Star Wars, it's also like, it's not super open door, welcome to Star Wars. You kind of you hit the ground running.
Yeah, this is not a starting point. And JPG, if I can share my fun confusion that you had to deal with last night.
Yeah, sure.
So step 1 was like the opening battle, and I paused it maybe 2 minutes in, and I was like, look, if Star Wars is going to keep putting this stuff out, they need to make it less confusing. Because these guys who are fighting with the Jedi look like bad guys, and they look exactly like stormtroopers. And so I'm really confused on why they look like stormtroopers when they're good guys. Don't they understand how that's really confusing?
So I had to actually draw out the timeline of why the good guys in this particular moment look like bad guys in the original films, and then look like even worse bad guys in the sequel trilogy. And I remember thinking throughout this, because we actually had a pretty serious conversation about the historical timeline of Star Wars. And I was very surprised because Alex didn't laugh at me the entire time. But I realized when we were talking about it that this historical timeline wasn't immediately available in Alex's brain, right? Like, and that kind of shocked me a little bit, because anytime that I watch a Star Wars property, my first inclination is going to be, okay, where does this happen in the timeline? As opposed to Alex, it's, okay, well, how good is this going to be? And that was kind of a weird, shocking revelation for me at this point.
And it doesn't help I haven't seen all of the things, and the things I've seen I don't really totally remember either. But like, he was like, oh, episode 3, when this happens. And I was like, I don't think I've seen episode 3. Like, it's just, I have a lot of missing pieces, obviously. So it's very confusing for me. Luckily, you don't have that problem with Ebony, so you got to skip through without a problem. But
well, one thing that, I mean, even with like The Mandalorian, touching back to that, we have a group chat of friends who watch shows, and we try to keep up and keep our dialogue going because we really enjoy that. One of our friends, Kareem, was also like, wait, I don't understand where this is all landing. And this is during season 2, where we've already seen an entire season, and like, wait, you're not sure where that is. So she's not alone in that being lost aspect, in the idea like, wait, where does this land? Because if you are not as entrenched in Star Wars sometimes, not that it's even like, that you're not trying, just like there's a ton of stuff going out there constantly. They're constantly hitting you with a new barrage. There's always a new marketing campaign. If you don't know about High Republic, there's that on the way now too. So it's like they are constantly hitting you with a barrage. One thing they try to do with those opening crawls is kind of dated a little bit as far as timelines, but this one didn't even give us that kind of opening crawl. They gave us just the audio announcer from the Clone Wars of like, this last time we saw the adventures of, like, we had that, but there's plenty of people who get lost in like, where in the Star Wars are we?
Which is surprising because with Marvel, with Disney owning Marvel and Star Wars, and how good they were at like spoon feeding, hey, this is kind of information you needed just in case you don't remember or didn't see it. I think you can get away with Falcon and Winter Soldier. I think you can get away with WandaVision. Are you going to have the same experience? No. But can you get away with it? Yes.
How about this though, Alex? The new Black Widow film that's going to be coming out. Where do you know where that is in the timeline?
No, I know it's a prequel because she's alive.
Okay, so but then I think that adds to your point of spoon feeding a general audience, right? We see Disney's inclination of that for Marvel, but I think there's a little bit of an assumption when it comes to Star Wars in general.
I think it's dangerous. It makes it harder to bring in new fans, to bring in younger fans.
No, I think that's kind of the general consensus of this whole panel, right? Like this is kind of it is a little bit dangerous.
Yeah, especially with Bad Batch, because if we look back at the timeline where we talk about different generations of Star Wars fans, like, oh, you liked Jar Jar, so you were of an age when he came out, he was an enjoyable character for you, that's totally a valid feeling. Like that's how you felt when you came into it, so that's awesome. You found joy in this. That's what we should always be happy for. But it's definitely like there's a generation after the prequel trilogy who's like, oh no, I'm all about just the Clone Wars cartoon series. That was there for Star Wars. Bad Batch definitely falls on that, like, hey, this is extra credit reading for you. If you want to go back, you can read it. But it's not a fresh jumping on point at all, which it's Mandalorian could have been that way too, depending on how you came to it. It could feel like, oh, this is just a drop-in story, but in that it also doesn't have too many ties to other stuff, it's a little easier. This is just kind of, there's so many connecting threads, and that they actually added into it just for the story. It's a tough. No, go ahead.
I'm going to take us a little deeper, and I'm going to take a hard turn into this because dungeon dive, yay! To me, this was a lot of colonization that we actually got to see happening, with a lot of lies to how it came about, who was taking over, right? Misinformation. So how did seeing that kind of affect you guys emotionally, mentally?
I mean, and by the way, I guess we should probably put forth that this is going to be spoilers for the first 2 episodes of Clone Wars: The Bad Batch. Like because this is
2 hours.
Yeah. The first one.
It's an hour and a half. Okay, you need to calm down over there, Alex. Okay?
The first one was an hour and a half. The second one was a half.
The first one was an hour.
Oh my god, it was so long.
God,
it was 75 minutes. It was an hour and is an hour and like 15 minutes.
Okay, don't split the middle right now, Ken. Okay,
we're both right.
We're not both right. We're not playing that game.
No.
Okay. Yeah. So yes, this is going to be spoilers for the first 2 episodes. Something that I was going to bring up and make the hard right turn, but you're making it for me right now, Alex.
You're welcome.
Yeah, is the idea of this hard inbred colonialism, right? Like we have to, so we see this very, very very on the nose with the character Crosshair in the first episode, but we see that actually seep in a little bit more when Tech and Wrecker are actually joking with each other, right? Tech basically tells Wrecker that the only reason why he likes to blow stuff up is because it's built into him. It's something that is intrinsic to the culture that they are in, right? And Wrecker pushes back on that. Wrecker's and Wrecker doesn't want to, in the most Wrecker of ways, he doesn't want to be subject to the conditioning and the cultural ties that he's already in as well. As opposed to Crosshair. Crosshair knows what he's doing is wrong, and then they physically brainwash him at this point, right? And I think it's a really good example of how the culture that you're living in can brainwash you, or the subcultures that you're living in can really brainwash you into thinking things that you wouldn't normally think about.
On that note, too, like my brain, like I didn't see it from the colonial side. I saw it more of commentary on World War II, and essentially the registration of, in episode 2, they talk about, oh, you need to get your chain code. You need to register with the Empire so we can track you. And like that's where I'm like, they're just like, okay, here's your brand, here's your market. That was that kind of just that registration act of like, oh no, everyone needs to be monitored and given a number. It's like, no. Anytime you give someone a number that they don't want, you're forcing it on them. This is now like, that was like, dang, okay, like we're just gonna put it out in Front Street, which I appreciate, and hopefully it's not as subtextual that people get like, no, this is making a direct connection to that.
And so, I mean, there are two sides to that, right? Number one is like, we live in America. We have social security numbers, right?
Yeah.
But on the other side of that, and Alex, like, this is going to be directed towards you. This could definitely be seen as a Star of David.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, for sure. And that's kind of where I was going with it.
Mm-hmm.
My brain was where Ken's brain was.
Mm-hmm.
But I do have stuff for where your brain is for later. But yeah, I mean, Jews had to register as Jewish. And then they were tracked to where they lived. They were tracked to where they went to temple. They had to wear some kind of marking. They were given numbers. I mean, all of that is very, hey, wait a sec. But this is something that I think gets ignored a lot. And it's hard for me because Star Wars is, I mean, I've said it a million times, right? It's space Nazis. And so when you look at this and you see people all the time, right? Oh, I love Darth Vader, and oh, I love the clone troopers, and it's like, yes, you do, and it's a fantasy.
Stormtroopers, not clone troopers. Clone troopers are the good guys.
Stormtroopers, sorry. Will they become the bad guys? It's very confusing.
No, okay. We're gonna do this on air, Ken. If you can help me out with this right now. Mm-hmm. Okay, so clone troopers, those are all Jango Fett clones, and they all have better armor. Is that correct, Ken?
Yes.
Okay.
Because they spent the money, like they are worth. That's part of the discussion is like they are better. Oh, but Tarkin says, but they cost more. That's why we can just use conscripts. It's like no, you're getting something here out of that's. There is the discussion too of what their value is, and yeah, so they have trained. They are, yeah, they're better. Sorry, go ahead. Such a tangent my brain wants to go on. I'm sorry.
Alex, please.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Okay, so for me, when I see people who are all about the stormtroopers and the dark side, and yes, it's fantasy and it's fake, and so you want to be like, yeah, cool, you do you, boo-boo. But on the flip side of that is I'm sitting there going, oh, but you're like this close to wearing a swastika, but like also I don't think you're that kind of person, because a lot of the people I know who support and love the dark side aren't those kind of people. But it's the idea that the fantasy of it takes away from the reality of it. And so for a lot of people who aren't connected or don't experience it, that's easy to do. But for people who have that emotional attachment to what's going on, it's kind of like, oh, this kind of makes me uncomfortable in a weird way.
And I think that bleeds kind of into the idea of like the idolization of the bad guys and even the idolization of like harsh individualism, right? We love the Bad Batch. We love Clone Force 99 because they don't play by the rules. Because they don't they can do their own thing. They don't have to listen to their rankings or anything like that, right? Oh, but that's not really how. And I'm sorry to say this, but like that's not really how war works, right? Like you can't just have all these renegades doing their own thing. It's why like a platoon of knights would definitely wreck a platoon of samurai, right? Because a samurai might be a better individual fighter. Ken, your eyes just glossed over when I said that as
well. No, I'm like running in my head. I'm like, would they be? I'm thinking, okay. Like I'm like, well, what are they armed with? Are we only using bayonets? Are we only using swords? Like what's the armament here? What are we talking about? Like,
just go with my analogy here, okay? It's because they understand, like knights as a unit understand how to fight with each other, as opposed to samurai understand how to fight individually, right? And that I don't know. It whenever we talk about like, oh, like I love the dark side, or like, oh, I love Han Solo. These are these rugged individualistic characters that somehow move the story forward. But then me as an audience member, I always think like, well, like how are you doing this? Because you're supposed to be working together as a team, right?
It's interesting because you talk about the Bad Batch like, oh, they get play by their own rules, and whenever I hear they play by their own rules, I always think of the Dirty Harry's like, oh yeah, he's a cop who gets the job done, and it's like right now we should definitely stop and think about how we think about that of like, oh yeah, they're working outside the boundaries of rules because they got to get stuff done. Like, wait a minute, why are they doing that? Are they getting the right guy? Like, are you saying the ends justify the means? So, sorry, that's my first reaction there.
Oh no, I definitely appreciate that.
Is it weird that the way I looked at the Bad Batch, and this could be because I'm lacking a whole lot of information, but I looked at them as because they were broken clones, damaged clones.
Yeah.
Defective. Yes.
Defective.
Defective,
That's what I was going
deviant. We're more deviants than defectives, but go on.
for. Oh, I love that. The accent's so good. So for me, I looked at them as they could be more creative. So it's not that they were always going against the rules, but it's that they could think outside the box beyond like, okay, they told us to go here, do this formation, shoot that, and go home. And they're like, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's now find a creative. Okay, if we do this, go here, work as a team, we can use all our skills, XYZ, done, boom. And so to me, it wasn't as much that they were breaking the rules as they were just more creative thinkers.
Yeah,
missing information. So.
That's kind of the best way to take them, because they are deviants. They do think in a different way. There's a recent talk about autism and what that is. There was a streamer who's trying to raise money for that, and then one of the things that they were raising money for was for a I'm trying to think of the term, but the non-for-profit. One of their old literature points was that they're trying to cure autism, but then they had a lot of pushback against that, because it's not a cure. It's for helping people find a way to live with it and work with it, not a cure. And that's almost the same type of thinking. It's like, you're not trying. They're not wrong. There's nothing inherently wrong with the Bad Batch. They find a different way to live, and that's what we need to. That's what we kind of see. Like, oh, they're not defective. They just work this way. Essentially, instead of going from A to B to C, they just go straight to D, and you're like, I didn't even see that path. So how did you get there? And that's how this team works together.
I think that's an incredible parallel as well, mostly because of how what they refer to as the regs, or the non-deviant clone troopers, and how they interact with them just in general, right? Mm-hmm. It's not only a stigma, but it's a hatred for how they live differently, right?
Yeah. And it's really interesting, too, because once they're back in the barracks, and we're jumping all over in the episode here, they're back in the barracks after their mission, and none of the other clones in the mess hall are unique. When you watch the Clone Wars, you see there are some clones that shave their head, there's some that get tattoos, there's some that dye their hair, because they want some individualism to themselves. They say in a later episode, too, it's interesting that people, as clones, we wanted names instead of numbers, and now people are trading numbers for names for numbers, and it's a shift there. And when you're back at the barracks on Kamino, they're the only irregulars, and also everyone is pretty much wearing helmets. As soon as they get back, everyone's got their helmets on. There's no one out of uniform, so to speak, even to the point that at that point, Crosshair doesn't take his helmet off until they get back to their own barracks. Mm-hmm. Crosshair's already been triggered, and he's staying in that mindset. Like, he's already been activated. And so meanwhile,
soldiered.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the other four are taking their helmets off, and they're like, no, this is what's comfortable for us. So it's also, it's visually, there's cues for that. There's reasons, but it's just interesting to see that they did that as soon as that happened.
But even that, to me, is a connection in those two different ways, because I can see it as being, okay, they're not normative, so something different, right? So instantly everybody hates them, when really it makes them smarter, more creative, more intelligent. But the other side of it is they're the ones who, when Order 66 goes off, they're like, wait a second, like, why? What's going on? I want to understand it. How many people were they like, hey, kill the Jews? And somebody was like, wait, hang on a sec. And there's stories of, hey, this person survived because somebody said no. This person survived because somebody questioned that, or let them get away, or hid them somewhere. And so yet again, it's like I can bring that connection back to my history, or my, culturally, obviously not personal. But culturally, I can tie that in with like, hey, there were people in their own troops, in their own families, who disagreed, right? We saw, oh, this grandmother did it and the family didn't know. And those people change lives. And obviously they change Omega's life, and they change, is it Cut?
Cut. Yeah, he was, yeah.
Okay. So Cut's family, they got out because of them. And
Ken, by any chance, off the top of your head, do you remember Cut's story?
Cut was originally, he was on mission. This is right after the Battle of Geonosis. He got downed on that planet, and after all of the droid forces and the clones were wiped out except for him, and he's like, he chose to desert. If anyone wants to, you can go back to season 2, episode 10 of Clone Wars, and that's called The Deserter, and that's his first episode where you get to meet him. And he says, like, no, like after this, I decided that I didn't want to be part of the war anymore. And so he deserted his post, but it's like part of the discussion of like, are we clones? Are we robots? Because the enemies are using robots. So what makes us different from them at that point? And that's part of his story there of him deciding, I'm done with the war. This is not the life I want to lead.
So can I take that in a different dark direction?
Oh God, yeah.
Apparently it's what I'm doing today. I don't
Yeah.
where you asked.
Alex being real dark right now.
Would you guys say that sending the clones out, knowing that they have feelings and emotions, even though they're quote unquote clones, right? They know what's going on. They feel pain. Could you say that that's similar to the way people were treated like Civil War, where they're like, oh, we're going to send the Black Battalion out first because we don't value them. And if they die, I didn't die, so it's fine. Like, is there a similarity there that you guys see?
Oh man, because this gets deep into like people like Saw Gerrera, right? Which you actually meet in the first episode of the Bad Batch. Saw is a homegrown fighter, right? And we find out that Saw was never supposed to be the leader of his insurgency group. It was supposed to be his sister who died, and they never wanted Saw to be the leader of this particular group because there was so much anger in him to the point where it made him pretty radicalized. He was on the same side, but unfortunately he was by definition standards, he is radicalized, right? And so I would say yes, right? Like and my gigantic problem with Star Wars is the treatment of clones and droids, right? Clones in the very beginning of the series, and then droids just all throughout, right?
Yeah.
Because we understand that droids do have feelings and everything as well. I think the biggest point for me in all this, and I hate to get away from the Bad Batch, but oh my gosh, is it Ken? It's oh my gosh, Lando Calrissian's droid in
Lobot.
Solo. I'm sorry,
Lobot.
No. His droid in Solo.
In Solo, sorry. L3.
It's L3 because it's Lee.
37. Yeah. Lee.
Yeah. So it's L3. Okay.
Yeah.
L3's whole point in the series is to talk about, or not in the series, but in the film, is to talk about droid rights, right? And then when she gets damaged beyond repair, Lando plugs her into the Millennium Falcon, completely taking away her autonomy. And that's something that I'm like, okay, but now we're also, we have Cut where he deserted, but then he's constantly afraid of being taken back into the army because he has no agency when he's a part of the Clone Wars. I don't know. Yeah. It's something that really bothers me. But yes, thank you, Alex.
Rightfully so. It's something that they touch on at points, but it's something that they're like, they talk about it, but they're like, also we're a kid show and we can never truly answer this because we can't. But I'm glad that it is brought up, and it's definitely it's talked about in certain circles if you're going to dive deep enough into it. Because I always think it's hilarious that there's like watching, I think it was Revenge of the Sith. At one point, R2 shocks a droid and then they kick him back. I'm like, he was programmed with a vengeance circuit. Why does a robot want revenge? Like, what is? It's one thing. Like, I feel sadness. I feel this. I feel an urgency for like a preservation of life. But to have vengeance as a programming, like, what sadistic programmer was like? You're gonna feel this. Like, man, like they.
Like, who is sitting there and giving all these droids feelings?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh gosh, Ken, I know that we've been going into a bunch of our deep questions.
I know, I'm sorry.
Do you have any sort of question that you wanted answers from us or anything like that, or any discussion points?
Discussion points, like, so I was really happy to see Caleb Doom in this, the young Padawan with Jedi Master Depa Billaba, because I love these characters.
Just a side point for that. Having Freddie Prinze Jr.'s voice come out of that little boy was very jarring.
At first, it's funny because it's like for a quick moment, I'm like, oh, are they tweaking his voice down a little bit? Or are they pitching his voice so it sounds younger? And then like the next line, he just drops it all together. He's like, no, I'm just I'm just me. Let's go.
I'm just a grown man in this little boy's body right now. Yeah. And so the cameo was incredible, right?
It was good. It's like there's different things in my brain. Like one, it's that they are now uncanonizing the comics that they made that were all part of like Disney's new canon is all canon. You can trust it all, and like no, you can't because we want to tell this story, which is their way to try and.
Why it's so confusing.
Fair enough. There's definitely times where I can get that, and they tried to repair it all with their wiping away of canon, but now they're like, no, we just whatever's in the shows and the TV whatever's in the TV and movies, those are your hard canon. That's all you can kind of bet on. But so I was happy to see him. I was happy to see Jedi Master Depa Billaba because we actually hadn't heard. She had never had a speaking role before. She had been in different scenes in, I want to say, Phantom Menace. She, by the way, is the Jedi Master who looks to be Indian in descent. She actually has the two jewels or pearls on her head marking, and I was happy to see her. But also, Kanan's really light skinned in this, and I'm like. That's one thing. Like it was kind of joking around, like, "Oh, it's our first Puerto Rican Jedi is Kanan Jarrus." But then he's a very much a light-skinned young boy, and I'm like,
"Oh no! All right, Ken, you fell in, you triggered my trap card."
Oh, Ken, do better.
I mean, or great minds think alike. It's all I can think of saying, but.
Io9 and Gizmodo put out an article why Star Wars fans are concerned about the Bad Batch and whitewashing, right? Caleb Dune was actually one of the top features of this also, but also the Bad Batch in general is kind of whitewashing a little bit when we think about it, right? First and foremost, voiced by D. Bradley Baker, which, not of Maori descent, but an incredible talent. And I'm always a little bit torn and on the fence on this because on the one hand, like, oh, that sucks. We could have hired a Maori voice actor or something like that, right? But then also at the same time, D. Bradley Baker put so much life and so much nuance into these different clones, not just for the Bad Batch, but for the Clone Wars as an entire series.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm torn for that. But then we have the addition of Omega, who's voiced by Michelle Ang,
who is also New Zealander.
Who is also an Asian New Zealander. That's actually her voice. That is not an accent being done or an amalgamation of an accent like D. Bradley Baker is doing right now. And but then we have like this like little blonde, like light-eyed young woman being played by an Asian New Zealander. And I also don't know how to feel about that. Because is this just like an all-new clone? Because it sounds like that, in the story in the 2 episodes that we have so far, it sounds like that they say that there are 5 deviant clones. This is the 5th one. Is she is she also part of Jango Fett? They just made her a lady. Like, what is happening right now?
I was curious about that too. That a lot of the because of their deviant genes, I don't mean to, I'm trying to find the best way to say that, is because their genes are different and altered from the original base clone of Jango Fett. And so seeing that they are some different shades. So you do have the darker hunter, and then you have the very light-skinned tech. So it's like there's different shades there. And I do see like, okay, you are going lighter. Like none of them went darker than maybe Hunter, and Hunter's like just one shade removed from, let's say, Rex. Like, so there is that. I for the clones and definitely the voice actors, we talked about this before, is that it's tough because I don't know if it's tough, but casting for the original Clone Wars movie, they went with traditional voice actors. So they didn't look for a diverse cast. They were like, who do we cast to make this kids movie? And then from there we had D. Bradley Baker, and he's done a phenomenal job to give such a wide variance of voices to these different clones. And it does suck because we talked about it when we were going to get Mandalorian, and like, oh well, if we get Rex, how is he going to sound? If we get Boba coming back, how will he sound? Because we've had these same voice actors in our heads for 10 years plus. And I appreciate that D. Bradley Baker has done such a good job and trying to give a spectrum of voices for the same person, essentially genetically. And so he's done the work. So it's like, when they say, hire the best person for the job, I'd be hard pressed to find another voice actor to step into that role and meet that range of what they're looking for. But then again, too, it's like we don't know if they even tried. So at this point, I think we're locked in. So I'm like, I just kind of take it in stride, but do recognize that I was happy that when we saw Jennifer, is it Jennifer? Or sorry, Michelle Ong.
Michelle.
Yeah, when we saw Michelle, I looked that up. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm glad that they had the opportunity to fix this to a degree, and they did. And so they stepped up and like, okay, it wasn't just another voice actor. They went with a New Zealander, so you would get that. And you said it's pronounced Mari.
Mary.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And so like, I'm glad that they went to try and find for that part and fit that, so that they did show that thoughtfulness. That's important to me.
I think this is the debate JPG and I have had off air about music and things a million times, but it's that weird thing where I'm definitely a fan of, if you're doing an animated series, get voice actors, not celebrities. Because celebrities, it's just, we want to hear The Rock in this thing. It's not The Rock changing his voice, altering it so that you don't know it's him. And that's a special talent the voice actors have. So for me, I'm always like, please just use voice actors. Use the skill, use the talent. But then you go back to, okay, who had the opportunity to get those skills, to get those talents? People with privilege, people with access. So it does come down a lot of times to, you're missing a lot of minorities, you're missing a lot of representation because they weren't given the chance however many years ago to even get into a career like that.
This is actually connects to a conversation that Ken and I were having separately, where we were talking about comedians doing podcasts. Ken, do you remember this?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Okay. So the point that I think you have right now is that, like, you know, voice actors have less opportunities than actors do at this point, right? That is the nature of the business itself.
And they worked really hard on a skill to be able to voice multiple characters.
Yeah. And then Ken and I, we're kind of like lamenting on the fact that these comedians get into podcasting in order to have more I guess like
reach.
Exposure,
and
reach, yeah. So, but we were also like, wait, no, you're already good at being funny. Like, leave this space for other people who want to dive deeper into things, right? And of course, you know, like this was more of like a joke conversation where, you know, we obviously understand that you can do both, but also at the same time, I think I see this a lot with comedians and actors going into tabletop RPG stuff, right? I mean, the newest one is Jeff Goldblum. Jeff Goldblum has a D&D series now. Which of course, and Ken's making a face right now, but
yeah, I'm just like, I'm doing like the face palmy kind of thing. Not that it's bad, like I love Jeff Goldblum, but
I'm gonna watch the hell out of it, right?
Jeff, leave something else on the table for the rest of us. Like when they're giving away talent, don't go back in line for a fourth time. I'm sitting here with absolutely nothing, okay?
You know, honestly, what I wish creators like this would do, and I know that this is a way about me thing, but like, there's already people who've been putting in the time, putting in the work. And obviously for things like this, you're really not going to make it huge without some kind of name already attached. Let's be real. There's 5 million podcasts. There's 5 million D&D games. There's Twitch streamers galore. So I really wish sometimes they would just be like, hey, let's find one of these smaller ones. I would like to join your group. And now they're giving back to these people who supported them, who were inspired by them, and bringing them up with them instead of, hey, me and my 5 celebrity friends who really don't need the fans, really don't need the money, really don't need the exposure. We're just going to do it and then pull more people away from the people who would support these smaller channels.
Yeah. It's unfortunate because it's like you do like you don't want to say like, hey, leave something up for the you've already had yours, just sit back. It's like, but to a certain degree, you're too like, hey, the struggle of any type of entertainment right now is that you no longer have the steady stream pipeline that you used to have 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It's like, oh, shows that used to have viewership of, you know, oh, we only had 20 million that night, let's cancel this show. People would kill for 20 million views now because everyone is so diversified in their viewing. So it's like you're not getting the same numbers on podcast as you do over here in comics. Comics are the same way. You're like, oh, a comic number that used to get rate a cancellation someone would be ecstatic to have nowadays because there's so few people buying comics because they have so many other sources of entertainment.
Mhm.
So it's like, how do you find that way to like make your name and get out there? But then it's harder when, again, I mean, Jeff Goldblum steps into it and you're like, well, yeah, sure, they're going to do the shirtless guy from Jurassic Park. Why wouldn't I want to watch that? Like,
Right.
that's exactly what I want to see. Thank you. Like,
Yeah, I definitely don't think that they can't do it. I think they just need to give back while they do it.
I don't want to keep. I always feel like this whenever we do the show as well, but like, I feel like, you know, there have been a few times where we haven't gotten to highlight the best things about the Bad Batch in the last
Yeah, we
episode so far.
checked with the Bad Batch, right?
What do you think has been incredible? I hate this so much. I hate this because this is how the show always goes. What do you think the Bad Batch did incredibly well?
This is now a silent part of the podcast in audio medium, where I think about what they did.
No, remember, Ken, the magic of editing.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll go while Ken thinks, if that's helpful. The reason I can tie it into all the things that I've previously mentioned is because they did those things so well to trigger those feelings, right? The way that they showed Cut having to get his family out of there and having to hide under the hats and having to fake a number so that they wouldn't actually be tracked, and the feeling of getting that number and the feeling of getting tracked or not being able to spend their money all of a sudden. I mean, all those things to me were very triggering, but they were triggering because they did it right. Like as much as I'm upset at the feelings that it brought up, they did that so well that it brought those feelings to life. And I hope that people can take those connections and tie it back to history the way that I can, so that they can say, oh, yeah, this isn't great. Let's make sure this doesn't happen again. Because even if I don't get it and I'm 6 and I didn't get it the first time and I've never even heard of the Holocaust or anything else, I can at least see by Star Wars that, hey, this is not great, that they're corralling everybody, taking away their forms of transportation and taking away their names and giving them numbers. So now as a 6-year-old, I can make sure that that doesn't happen in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
I guess if I'm jumping back to something that you'd mentioned with the casting, because we were discussing the voice actors too. I appreciate that Depa Balaba is played by Archie Punjabi, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but she is a voice actress of Indian descent. Also, one of the Kaminoans is played by, Napase is played by Gwendolyn Yao, who's also a Chinese voice actress. I believe Chinese American. And so it's like they did go in for some of these roles that have they do have some twinges and some colors of another culture. Like the Napase has that third eye stone over her forehead, so it's like that is a nod to another culture. And the fact that they got a voice actors of color in there, I appreciate that. Like that could have been, with voice acting, you can have have voice actor do up to 3 roles and at the same cost. If they do 4, that's a second paycheck. Whereas with this, it's like, oh, they could have just had another voice actor do that one tangential role, and they didn't. They brought in another person. I appreciated that. I appreciated too, like that they do make these little nods that we were talking about earlier of like, oh, the conscripted soldiers, like, no, they're going to go for the cheapest thing possible and just try and bring in whoever they can, which then brings into my mind is like, oh, we could have soldiers that are well trained and know what the right thing to do is, or we can get more affordable guys who could probably do the job but aren't trained well, and we're kind of okay with that. Like, so you're okay with essentially stormtroopers being the police force, and if they're not doing the best job, they cost less, so let's just go with that. Like, what does that say about this new empire that you're trying to build? And so like those are the type of things. I love that Saw said, the Clone Wars may have ended, but the Civil War is about to begin. Like they do give you that idea of like, hey, times are changing and we are ready for this. But I mean, Saw is a radical, so he's right there on the forefront, ready. He's always ready for a fight. Like he's like, no, I'm watching you.
I do have to correct myself too, just because I do kind of hate calling Saw a radical. Because it's weird, right? Like we're supposed to be, when it comes to between Mon Mothma and Saw Gerrera, we're supposed to be agreeing more with Mon Mothma. And although I also kind of agree with Saw Gerrera on a lot of stuff as well, right? So I hate using the term radical, so I apologize in advance that I put that in everybody's head. So for me, I think the potential for story, I think they did an incredible job with giving the Bad Batch so much potential for story. I always like to think about, like, okay, what sort of episodes can we come up with? Because we are still following, like, kind of like a children's a children's format in the sense of how we're going to be telling these like 30-minute storytelling tools, right? One of the episodes I need from this is how to make Echo feel more comfortable being a part of the Bad Batch, especially with him being a reg and joining because nobody else sees him as a reg at this point as well, right? I really want to see that episode. I want to see the episode where they can bond to where they fully feel like a unit. I also want to see more friendship episodes too, right? Like this group has been together for so long, and we've already gotten to see a good amount of Tech and Wreckers sort of interactions with each other, right? I definitely want more of that, and I think they're building and creating a space to where they can give that to us.
Yeah, and I want to see when Omega shows off her Force powers. I think that's going to be a great moment. I can't wait for that.
Wait, what?
When Omega shows her that she has midichlorians, that she has the Force.
Can a clone have that?
Interesting question, isn't that? I believe that is part of her mutation defect. It's so weird to keep talking about
deviation.
Deviation. That's the part of her deviation, is that they were toying around with that. Like, what does that mean? And the problem is that there's a lot of different lore within the Star Wars history of, like, can you clone a Jedi since it's midichlorians? Can you clone midichlorians? What do you do? And I mean, if we go back to Mandalorian, they were harvesting midichlorians from baby Grogu to give to the clone of Emperor Palpatine. So that was part of that storyline. So I think her deviation is that she's going to be she will be Force sensitive. That's the best way I can think to put it.
You say it out loud, and now I feel like an idiot for not thinking that. Like, because wow, okay, that's pretty obvious. Why did I not think of that in the first place? Because my thought process was, oh, she's just going to have a little bit of everybody. Because when she shoots Crosshair at the first one, I'm like, oh, cool, she has Crosshair's powers. And then we're just going to see but now I'm like, oh, dang it, it's obvious. She's definitely a Force sensitive.
Really smart, so you kind of already have seen her with Tech's powers too.
Yeah.
Can I ask something about that though?
Yeah.
So knowing that this is, as explained to me, episode 3, or happening at the same time-ish.
Just after, yeah.
Okay, and then you have movies 1, 2, and 3, which is somehow 4, 5, and 6, because that makes sense. And there's Rogue One somewhere in there, and I'm not sure what else.
Rebels.
Is it hard to watch these and think they're creating this stuff that didn't exist before, but then it can't go as far as you want it to go, because there's already things that have happened that, like, if Omega really made it further, she would be in those things?
I think you just triggered another thing in me right now.
I'm sorry.
No, okay. So I'm just very sorry for the rants, because
both of your faces is like I kicked your dog or something.
No, it's you activated that my superpower. Now I've been charged. Go. Now I've got your power.
My issue, especially with the sequel trilogy, is we are never given space to breathe. Right? All episodes 7, 8, and 9 all happen one after the other of each other, basically. Right? And as opposed to 4, 5, and 6, I think one of the best things that we got is that they actually used real time in between, in between the films, right? I think between 4 and 5 is like a year and a half or something, and then between 5 and 6 is almost 3 years, right? That, like, Solo's been in Carbonite. Solo's been in Carbonite, and I think it was like between a year and a half or 3 years or something like that, right? They gave us space in order to breathe and in order to tell stories, right? As opposed to, I think you are kind of right? There's episode 3 and 4 have a 19-year gap, because you have to get Luke and Leia from baby to 19 years old. And so we have time in order to tell these stories. And I think that's why that's prime real estate and space for Disney executives to just tell people to tell stories. And Filoni, just give everything to Filoni in that particular time period. That's it. That's all we have to do. And then everything's going to be magic, like from Star Wars from here on out.
Yeah, and it's to the idea too, like, oh well, we know that this person can't show up. To a certain degree, we have these closed-in thoughts of like, oh well, no matter what, Grogu has to die here because he can never come back. It's like, well, why not? Well, because we know this happens, right? But there's any number of events that can happen to take him out of that scenario, so he's over here when that big event happens. Because I mean, I guess we can do spoilers for Mandalorian season 2 because we're far enough away from it.
We're far enough away.
He goes off with Luke Skywalker, and you're like, oh, well, that must mean he's in the temple, and that's when Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, goes crazy and kills a bunch of people. It's like, okay, well, what if he's done with his training by then, and he goes back to Din? That's like, that could happen. But people are like, oh no, this locks everything in. You can't. People tend to have a strict adherence to like what they know, and it's funny because it's like in a medium where literally anything can happen. Like people are like, oh, Rey can't shoot lightning from her hands. That's not allowed. It's like, we didn't know Emperor Palpatine could do that in Revenge of the Sith. I'm sorry, Return of the Jedi. We didn't see Force lightning until that point. So why would that be? Why do you think that that's not allowed? Because it's like if they introduce something new, it can always happen. This is magic. We have space wizards. Like, roll with it. I think that people, because they might be, maybe they're hurt from bad storytelling where they're like, oh, and then a wizard did this, and they feel like it can't be done well. They're gonna automatically have a cringe reaction to like, oh, that can't happen. That it doesn't fit in my brain. It's like, there's stories that can happen outside your brain, and that's kind of the fun of storytelling, is when you don't see it coming. Like when you don't have everything laid out, it's like, okay, this is where we're gonna be. If you can change with the story as it's being told, that could be great. Like it could be. I mean, there's all kinds of storytellers out there, so if they hit those notes right, it can be fantastic. If it's not, and that gives you that gut reaction of like, oh, they're going to do this, and I don't like where that's going to go. It's like, that's because that's not where you see it going, but there's room for so many different trains of thought, and people have to be open to that. So I think that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, so it's kind of the idea of like, yes, we saw the big battle with the Solos and everything. I rolled my eyes. But there were multiple battles happening that these other main characters could exist on. So it's kind of like the Captain Marvel issue.
Yeah, I guess that Captain Marvel is a fair comparison too, because we talked about how the timeline on Marvel was pretty linear. It's like kind of just straightforward, aside from Captain Marvel and a little bit with Doctor Strange, because the way his story lands is a little bit off. But Captain Marvel,
I would also argue Captain America as well, because there's like a couple, and then Captain America goes all the way to the 40s, and then we come back. So
yeah, but that one's such a departure. It's easier for people's brains to be like, oh no, I can step back and be okay with that.
We have the benefit of actual history.
Yes.
When it comes to things like that, right?
Yeah.
Like when you see that blockbuster in Captain Marvel, you're like, oh, I know exactly when this is happening right now. So we have the benefit of real world history.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that's kind of where I lost my train of thought. I apologize.
Sorry, no, that's my fault. I derailed you. I just wanted to clarify, because like for people like me, I always picture like, okay, what I see on screen is like what's happening. And so if these characters aren't here, they somehow didn't make it. And I don't want to get attached to characters that aren't going to make it. You know, I'm all about like everybody has to live in kumbaya and stuff. So it kind of does help to have the idea of like, yeah, okay, we saw the Solos beat up the bad guys and knock out the Death Star, and that's what it's called, right? Yep. Okay. So we saw that happen, but maybe over here on this other planet, Grogu saved the entire planet from, you know.
You're touching on the idea that we have a whole galaxy to tell stories with, right? And that was my biggest issue when it came to a lot of the sequel trilogy stuff, and it came to a lot of the prequel trilogy stuff. There were so many Jedi. More than like 5 got away. Like I know that in my heart, because this is a big old galaxy, and there's no way that the Empire, especially with their struggling resources at the time, there was no way that they were going to hunt everybody down like that, right? Like they're well, plus like oh god.
no, it's totally fine. My brain thinks about that because you have a point. Like during the purge, how do they track that? How do they verify they've killed all those Jedi? Like that's definitely a large thing. The other side of my brain went to when the Bad Batch get back to Camino, they already have the Imperial logo on the side. Like, you guys already painted that? You guys stopped everything, and you had 5 clones go onto the scaffolding and repaint the logo. Like, you guys were on point about certain things. Like, they were like, no, it's all about branding. We're now the Empire, okay?
Well, I mean, they make a whole point of that in all of the Star Wars books right now, the in-canon books as well, is that what the Empire had was order. Was like literal, okay, like we have a chain of command in order to do things, and there was an efficiency to it, right? So I kind of loved that I was like, oh wow, they already put that up. Okay, cool. I'm not going to question it.
What a genius way to break a contract. Hey, I understand we were the rebellion, but now
we're the Empire.
So the contract is null and void instantly because I changed my name. Like, genius.
Maybe a little nod to reality too much for me, but yeah. And it's you talk about the order, and it's funny because that of course triggers the trap card in my head of the Bloodlines book, where they talk about there was a reason people accepted the empires, because they did bring order. They brought to some backwater towns, they did bring a certain measure of order, and that's where people saw that. But it's like there's so much that you're not seen behind that, and it's like you don't question it at all. Like, it's sorry.
It's hard also because I know that one of mine and Ken's favorite in-canon books is Lost Stars. And Lost Stars is like this, like, it's a little bit YA, like melodrama teen love story, which I feel like an idiot for loving, but it's also incredible. Mm-hmm. Right? And then they actually tell about like, oh, in the Mid-Rim, this is how everything was made better because the Empire rolled in. And I hated reading that, but I also appreciated the turn that they took for that as well.
Yeah.
I guess that makes sense.
They showed how people can be it's back to the colonial idea of like how, like, oh, we're bringing you civilization. You're like, oh, that's great. You're bringing me clean running water and this. Oh, but you're also taking all of our livestock, and you're taking all that.
Oh, but you're like, the oppression.
Yeah, like you're just too busy looking over here to realize this is happening back here.
All right, since we're past the hour mark, which I definitely promised Anthony would not happen. Sorry, Anthony.
Sorry, Anthony.
Sorry, Anthony.
Just a final thoughts on the Bad Batch before we wrap up, and I'm just going to let you two do it because we all know how I feel. So,
Ken, would you like to go first on this one?
I guess I'm looking forward to what they've got, what stories they want to kind of seed in for other base stories, because I'm sure we're going to get a few different characters that will pop up in a novel or in Mandalorian, because that's a lot of Mandalorian stuff was seeded in the cartoons. And so let's see where they bring these characters to life. Oh, and I'm looking forward to Ming-Na Wen as Fennec Shand voicing that character in future episodes. That's awesome.
I'm so excited for that.
That's what I'm looking forward to. First on the list.
You're giving us another story from the mind of Filoni, from the mind of his team as well. I cannot wait to see how the season unfolds. Like it's going to be. Now, Ken, do you happen to know how many episodes this is going to be?
I saw somewhere that it's somewhere almost maybe even 16 episodes.
Yeah,
I saw, and I was like,
has done 16, but he's the only one who has a number that high on IMDb.
Which are we counting we can't be counting the Clone Wars numbers, can we?
Sorry, who did you say has 16 appearances?
So on IMDb, Star Wars The Bad Batch, it shows D. Bradley Baker on 16 episodes. And then everybody else, it's 3 episodes, 2 episodes, and then 1 episode. So everybody else is lacking information except for D. Bradley Baker.
I think that's primarily because IMDb, as great of a site as it is to a certain degree fan edited. Like, people can go in there and adjust and add information. And since they have so little information to put in there, they just know that it's going to be 16 episodes and that it's going to have D. Bradley Baker in every episode because he's every one of the clones.
But it is
from Omega.
It is a good chance that it's probably going to be around 16.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited for. Give us the space to tell more stories.
Yeah. It's interesting too to see that like they went from that first episode of 75 minutes down to 30 minutes for a more concise storyline. Like we're swinging back from that first premiere episode into the week to week adventures of what does it mean to be on the run from the Empire. in their early days.
Now, before we fully wrap up, Ken, if people wanted to hear more from you, where could they find you?
You can find me across the internet at Ken Rolow. That's at KenRolow. You could also look up at Comic Banter. That is the trading card and comic-centric web show that I did for a little while. I'm planning to come back with that with my associate, Victor Segura. And also check out previous episodes of this podcast, of Geek Say What, Ready, Set, Geek, Geek Offensive. Check out all those different shows that I've been on. That's like the history, the future moving forward. I may have some more projects and probably more Comic Banter.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge, because if JPG had to do this with just me, I think he would have cried.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Anytime. Guiding your next pop culture journey, this has been an episode of In Quest of Geeks Dungeon Dive Edition.
Please check out our weekly Dungeon Dive and Tavern Team episodes on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and any other podcatchers. And make sure to rate, comment, and subscribe.
If you'd like even more adventures with us, our bi-weekly actual play RPG is in the same feed under Issues, where you can listen to us play as teen superheroes using the Masks A New Generation system.
Please follow us on social media at InQuestAGeek.
And don't forget to subscribe to our weekly Twitch streams at twitch.tv/InQuestOfGeek. And as we cross another dungeon off our list, here's what you can expect from our next episode.
I actually just had to look up the next episode. Sorry. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm actually really excited for this one because Alix let me put this on the screen. Let me put it on the schedule as well. But we are going to be checking out Justice Society World War II. DC animated film. She really only let me put this on the list because Matt Bomer is going to be the voice of the Flash. So I'm very, very excited to get to see this, but also Alix has some incentive as well. So once again, Justice Society, World War II.
Thank you for listening, Brave Questers, and remember, use what you've learned today to build better character.